Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW. Void were prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18 plus.
With the Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
This is your captain speaking. We've got clear runway and the weather's fine, but we're just going to circle up here a while and get lucky. No, nothing like that. It's just these cash prizes add up quick. So I suggest you sit back, keep your tray table upright, and start getting lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Vatsal Vora. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Cricket Corner podcast with me, Vatsal Vora, where for the first time in this podcast's history, we are not going to talk about cricket because, as you can see from the title of this podcast, this is the 100th episode of the Cricket Corner podcast, and I just thought that I want to sit down, just chat with my audience and say thank you so much to each and every one of you who has tuned in for one podcast, for two, for five, or for all 99, for all 100 podcasts. You all are as important as anyone. So thank you very much, first of all. And if you are new around here, make sure you are liking, sharing, and subscribing on YouTube. Make sure you are following the podcast on your favorite podcast channel, because this is the right moment to join the journey, because there is a lot of things that are planned for the episodes in the future. So yes, I just wanted to chat about how the Cricket Corner podcast was started by myself, and I just wanted to see how we have done over the past 14 months or so, and just wanted to recap how things have happened in the past. So this is going to be a relatively short episode. There is not much cricket to discuss around these parts in this episode in particular, but if you want to talk about cricket, there obviously be many more episodes to come in the future. So yes, let's recap how the previous 99 episodes have gone on this platform. So it all started back in February of 2023, 9th of February to be precise, and back then I was a sports journalism and communication students at Swansea University. I've just graduated with an MA in sports communication and journalism a couple of months ago. So if any recruiters are listening, I'm still available for a job. But it all started in February 2023, and I thought that I want to create a podcast that would look good on my CV and that can help me secure a job here in the UK. So that was the primary reason why I stepped on into the podcast world. And the best thing about me is that I follow all kinds of sports. So I was confused whether I should start talking about Formula One or football. But in the end, I fell on to cricket, because as an Indian, cricket is my favorite sport and has been ever since I was born. So it only felt right that I start by talking about cricket. And I found a very niche spot in the cricketing podcast fraternity, that where a podcast is based in the UK but talks about Indian cricket. So I hopped onto that opportunity, and ever since that February episode, I have been talking about Indian cricket on this channel or on this podcast. So we have covered a bunch of tournaments, a bunch of important series here on the podcast, and let's recap what all has been covered over the past 99 episodes. So the date, the 9th of February 2023, is an important date, not only for this podcast, but for Indian cricket in general. And that is because that is the day when Australia's tour of India commenced last year, that is. It was a 4-match test series, the Border Gavaskar Trophy, where Australia had come to play in India. And I think the reason why I started this podcast by covering this series is because there was so much hype when the series, even a couple of months before the series, this was one of the most highly anticipated series in quite some time. And the adrenaline, the excitement about the series made me just start this podcast. And when you hear some of those early episodes, you see how timid or how quiet or how shy I was in those early podcasts. But today, 100 episodes later, I feel like I'm much more confident in front of the mic. So that is something to be proud of. That is something which I'm really happy to see myself developing, to see myself learning, and obviously I'm still learning. So the Border Gavaskar Trophy was the very first series which was covered on the Cricket Corner podcast. For those of you who want to have a recap on that series, India won that series 2-1. They won the first test match in Nagpur, then the second test match in New Delhi. I think the third test match in Indore was won by Australia before the last and the final test match in Ahmedabad ended in a draw. So India won that series 2-1. We then talked about the ODI series between the two nations, India and Australia, which started right after the test series. That was a series which was won by Australia, I think 2-1 in the end. I think India won the first ODI in Mumbai, and after that they lost the two ODIs. I think one of them might have been in Visakhapatnam, if I am not wrong. After that, we took a break from international cricket and talked about the Indian Premier League, the 2023 version of the IPL, one of the most hyped IPL tournaments in recent history. And I think one of the primary reasons for that was that it was the first IPL which was a proper tournament. It had home and away fixtures. It had matches all over the country, because it was probably the first IPL in 3 years which was not affected by the pandemic. And I think that was one of the high points of this podcast as well. I remember the episode where I talked about Rinku Singh hitting Yash Dayal for 5 6. That went pretty viral across YouTube and stuff. So that was probably one of my first episodes where a lot of people were aware that a podcast called the Cricket Corner podcast existed, and I'm really happy that it got that traction. Chennai Super Kings won that IPL following a rain-affected final. I think it lasted for well over 24 hours, 48 hours of sorts, but CSK did defeat the Gujarat Titans, the defending champions Gujarat Titans, in the final in Ahmedabad, with Dhoni lifting his fifth IPL trophy. He's still going around, just like this podcast. After the IPL, we immediately shifted our attention back to international cricket and back to India versus Australia for once, because it was the World Test Championship final at the Oval. And unfortunately for India, they lost their second consecutive World Test Championship final. They lost to Australia. Travis Head scoring a magnificent 100 in the first innings, if I recollect things properly. And he was given the man of the match. And unfortunately for us, we still haven't lifted an ICC trophy since 2013. After the World Test Championship, for the first time in this podcast, we talked about a series which did not have India in it. We talked about the Ashes. I think the Ashes was something very nicely covered on the platform. And there are a couple of reasons why the Ashes were covered, despite it not being something remotely related to Indian cricket. And one of the primary reasons I really liked the Ashes is because I have a soft spot for England cricket, and secondly, being in the UK, the Ashes was all over the media, all on social media and stuff. I even went to the fifth and final day of the fifth test match at the Oval. amazing scenes. England picking up all 10 wickets on that occasion, with Stuart Broad picking up Alex Carey to level the series 2-2, picking up his final test wicket, his 604th one. I was there. I can still say that with pride. So yeah, we talked about the Ashes. And once the Ashes were done, we shifted our attention back to Indian cricket, where I talked about India's tour of the West Indies. This series, this tour in particular, might not be one that is too fresh in the minds of Indian cricket fans, but the series of podcasts, I should say, covering this tour is significant for me personally, and that is because I finally invited someone else onto the podcast. We finally brought in some of my friends to talk about Indian cricket as well. Shout out to Dwij, shout out to Nachiket, and shout out to Yash if you're listening to these podcasts and have made it through to the first 10 minutes. So that was the first time you heard someone else's voice on this podcast. After that, it was the ODI season, the ODI festival leading towards the Cricket World Cup in October and November. It all started with the Asia Cup, where India won the final against Sri Lanka, where they were completely bamboozled by Mohammad Siraj and were bundled out for just 50 runs in the final, with India winning the cup with relative ease. There was also this very good game against Pakistan, where Ishan Kishan and Hardik Pandya's partnership made sure that we won the first time around, and in the second game it was KL Rahul and Virat Kohli who scored centuries to help India beat Pakistan once again. Following that, it was all about the Cricket World Cup. We covered the Cricket World Cup in so much detail here on the Cricket Corner podcast. Sorry. It all started when teams started to announce their provisional squads, their 18-man squad, their 15-man squad. We covered and we talked about them, their strengths and weaknesses. Then we started to talk about each and every time India played in the World Cup. It was going so smoothly. Those couple of months leading from the Asia Cup towards the World Cup, it looked like India are probably the best one-day international side in the history after Ricky Ponting's Australia. But unfortunately, when it all mattered, India lost the final in Ahmedabad against the mighty Australia. And that was probably one of the down points in the 99 episodes in which I have talked about cricket. That podcast was probably one of the hardest one to make, because the thing is, I usually record a podcast right after the game is finished, like the last ball is bowled or the last run is scored, and that happens, and in the split second I'm in front of my laptop, turned on the mic, and I start talking about the game. Just because the game is fresh in my mind, there is still adrenaline in my body which propels me to talk about these games. But that particular episode was really difficult to record, because India had just lost the World Cup final. They've reached the World Cup final after like 12 years time. We have not won the World Cup since 2011, and it felt like we were the favorites. And yes, we were the favorites, but on that given day, Australia just played better cricket, were lucky with the toss. Not to make excuses or anything, but yeah, that episode was really difficult to record, but I think I did really well. If you want to check these episodes out, I will link them in the description of not only Spotify or Apple Podcasts, but it will be in the description of YouTube Music as well. So if you want to go back and listen to these previous podcasts, you can. But things in the cricketing world move so quickly, and once the IPL was done, it was only moments later when we had to start talking about cricket again. I did not cover the T20 series that happened right after the World Cup, because it felt like the sorrow of losing the World Cup was still so fresh in everyone's memory. I thought that is not right. So we started the post-World Cup coverage by talking about the IPL retentions and the player auction that took place in December. One of the biggest talking point from that saga was the the transfer of Hardik Pandya from the Gujarat Titans to the Mumbai Indians. The transfer created so much news all the way back in December that we are still talking about it, and people are still booing him left, right and center despite it being almost 4 months ago now. So we did talk about that. If you want to hear my views regarding the same, it will be in the description box once again. So do check that out if you want to. After the auction, India was touring South Africa, and we discussed about the Test series and the T20 series as well. Following that, it was the England's tour to India, one of the most highly anticipated Test series in recent memory. It had a lot more hype than the Border Gavaskar Trophy a year ago because it was Ben Stokes and their ultimate baseball theatre, which was coming to India for the first time, and everyone saw India as being Ben Stokes and Brendan McCullum's final frontier. Unfortunately for England, they suffered a 4-1 series defeat on that occasion. Despite winning the first test match in Hyderabad, India comfortably defeated them in Visakhapatnam, Rajkot, Ranchi and in the final test match in Dharamshala to secure a 4-1 series win, which makes everyone question whether baseball is the right approach or not, but only time will tell and answer that question. In that series, some notable things that happened was the emergence of Yashasvi Jaiswal, 2 back-to-back double hundreds, one in Visakhapatnam, one in Rajkot. There's obviously the injury-ridden squad which India had brought in that test series meant that the likes of Sarfaraz Khan, Dhruv Jurel were given debuts, Rajat Patidar as well. Bowling unit saw Mukesh Kumar, Akash Deep, those kind of players getting debuts. Devdutt Padikkal making his debut in the final test series. So it was a really good series to see how good the India's bench strength is, and that series will always be remembered for Rohit Sharma leading these youngsters and prevailing against the mighty England side. Talking about youngsters, we move to talking about the elderly players around the cricketing fraternity, and we have to talk about James Anderson, who's picked up his 700th test match wicket in that final test match in Dharamshala. He is now just 8 wickets behind the mighty Shane Warne and 100 wickets behind Muthiah Muralitharan. And we have just come full circle now, and here we are talking about IPL 2024, and that rounds up each and every series that has been covered here on the Cricket Corner podcast for the past 99 episodes. In all of this, a very important thing happened with me and the podcast, and it happened in September, if I remember things correctly, right before the Cricket World Cup, and that was I joined the Cricket Corner podcast, joined the Sports Social Podcast Network. If you are listening this podcast on the UK or you are listening this anywhere else, you might hear a catchphrase being spoken before the podcast stating that this podcast is brought to you by the Sports Social Podcast Network. I think joining that podcast network, the Sports Social Podcast Network, has really given an identity to the Cricket Corner podcast, and I am grateful to them for having me on board. So that is what has happened in the on the Cricket Corner podcast over the past 99 episodes, this being the 100th one. There is still a lot of cricket to talk about, so before we wrap things up, let's look ahead about what is going to be covered on the podcast in the near future. Obviously, we are already in the midst of the 2024 IPL, and that will be covered after each round, so stay tuned for that. Following the IPL, we'll quickly move on from franchise cricket to international cricket once again as the World Cup, the T20 World Cup kickstarts in early June in the West Indies and the United States. Really excited to see how cricket is received in the US, with India versus Pakistan being played in New York of all venues. And After that, I'm not really sure who India play. I am certain India are traveling to Zimbabwe. We'll probably talk about that as well, because I'm assuming there will be a lot of youngsters which will be named in that tour. Then I guess there is a New Zealand tour. I think they are traveling to India for a test series. But the one which I am personally looking forward to is the Border Gavaskar Trophy. We will once again complete a full circle when India travel to Australia to play 5 test matches. I think the schedule is already out. I don't remember when it exactly starts, but I think it's towards the Australian summer. India have already won 2 consecutive series in Australia, and they'll be hoping to make it 3 in a row, but only time will tell. It's a completely different Australia setup, and nowadays led by the legendary Pat Cummins. So that will be a very, very important series, probably the best series 2024 has to offer to international cricket. So yeah, that is the 99 episode journey of the Cricket Corner podcast. Before I leave, I wanted to talk about one episode in particular, and you might have that question in mind and you might want to ask me, what was your favorite episode? You have had 99 episodes on the platform. Which one was your favorite? And that is a really good question, and hands down my personal favorite episode came out on the 26th of May 2023, and it was me talking about Jason Roy declining an English contract to go and play in the Major League Cricket in the United States. I think I talked about the friction between international cricket and franchise cricket. I talked about how these giant conglomerates in India own so many teams around the world that they can basically have player under their contracts, and then the national team has to ask these big conglomerates whether their player can play for their nation. So I think that particular episode will be, and so far is, my favorite episode, but you never know. In recent memories, I really like talking about Ishan Kishan and Shreyas Iyer and how they were not given a central contract. I think that one was good. That was a good discussion as well. So I'll link all of these episodes in the description. I'll link the Jason Roy episode in the description. I'll also link the Hardik Pandya one, the World Cup final, and the Ishan Kishan Shreyas Iyer saga. So make sure if you are interested why those are my picks, you can go and have a listen. But yeah, once again, like I mentioned early on in this podcast, thank you very much for tuning in, and I hope to see you guys on this journey towards possibly another 100 or another 1,000 episodes. For the time being, for the 100th time, this is me, Vatsal Vora, signing off. Ciao for now.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
Okay, round 2. Name something that's not boring.
A laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Ah, sorry, we were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right, ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Hey guys, it is Ryan. I'm not sure if you know this about me, but I'm a bit of a fun fanatic when I can. I like to work, but I like fun too. It's a thing. And now the truth is out there. I can tell you about my favorite place to have fun. Chumba Casino. They have hundreds of social casino style games to choose from with new games released each week. You can play for free anytime, anywhere. And each day brings a new chance to collect daily bonuses. So join me in the fun. Sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18 plus.